Share my screen here, and very excited to be here. My first time on Products Account webinar. Hopefully I'll be invited back again. Here we go. Denise and everyone, hopefully you see that.
Looks good.
Okay, fantastic. Let's get started. So as Denise said, we're going to talk about a lot of acronyms. In general, when we do enterprise software, it's all TLAs. So get ready for those. We'll talk a little bit about the why, when, and how of this shift transition from PLG to SLG. If you're new to these two terms, through this presentation, I'll explain them as well. So don't worry too much about that. Okay, let's see if I can move forward. All right, let's start with a very quick introduction. As Denise said, my name is Ilan Frank, and I was actually born on a kibbutz in Israel. If you don't know what that is, it's a communal farm, about 300 of them established. And what's interesting is that those that remain and remain strong actually had to transition from agriculture to industry of some sort, many of them going to high tech. Here's one, the kibbutz that I was born on, where the Mars rover, parts in the Mars rover are made on this kibbutz. Not exactly PLG to SLG, but a very interesting transformation that I experienced early on in my life. From there, I moved to Minnesota. This is an actual picture of a snowman that we built one of the first years that we were there. I don't know what I was doing, but it could be because snow falls just after Halloween, and I got the two confused. I'm not 100% sure, but this is a true story. And then, of course, went to the University of Minnesota, where I majored in a computer science related degree, and then moved out here to Silicon Valley. My experience in Silicon Valley has been 25 years of enterprise software, really both in true form to the show, both in the Hoolies of the Valley and the Pied Pipers of the Valley. I am not so much the 0 to 1, although I've done those startups. I'm much more the 1 to 100. So my experience, as you'll see in a second, is much more in coming in and taking a company that's already kind of found that product market fit and exploding it from there to to the enterprise market. I had the reverse, though, as one of my first experiences at SAP, where when I joined SAP, they're a very established company, a 40-year-old enterprise software company, and they wanted to start moving into the cloud. And so one of my my first roles there was really to develop a couple products that were one in collaboration, one in analytics, that really were very, very much PLG within SAP. I learned a lot about, unfortunately, didn't learn a lot about PLG there. I learned a lot about SLG because it was such a sales-led growth company that it was very difficult to change that DNA. But it was very helpful 4 years because I learned from some of the best on how to do sales-led growth. Everything from pricing and packaging to marketing to spiff and motivations for sales folks and teaming up with customers and co-development and all kinds of things like that. From there, I moved to Slack. At this point, this is my headshot from Slack. I already had the gray hair and the SAP background. I think one of the two of them got me the job at Slack. I joined Slack in 2016, really as the company was already doing very well with small companies. The company was 2 years old at that point, doing very well with SMB, but now really being pulled into the enterprise. There's large enterprise companies really pulling Slack in and saying, we want this, our employees want it, but if you're not enterprise ready, we can't have you. We can't install this here. And so that was my job, was to get Slack enterprise ready as quickly as possible so that we can attract and retain and grow within this large company segment. And then doing very much the same thing now at Airtable over the last couple of years. All right. So with that introduction, let's talk a little bit about product-led growth. And we'll start with really the definition of product-led growth. This is from ChatGPT, so I take no credit to this definition, but it feels very, very accurate as far as what product-led growth it involves. And I think that there's 3 different areas where product-led growth is specifically good. The first is is that you have really an end user focus. So that product is really directly goes after the user that uses your technology, as opposed to sales-led growth, where you have a user and a chooser. And a lot of times when you have that dichotomy, it is good to actually start thinking about sales-led when you have someone that has a budget that is different than the end user. So per that point, it's important not only that you're targeting the end user, but that end user has budget, has access to install the software. Back in the day, has a CD-ROM and the ability to get a CD and install on their laptop. But now the ability to, of course, paint their own destiny a little bit and bring software into to the company. And then the last thing is that ideally you want this end user to be able to have some type of collaboration or viral touch within other end users. That's not always the case. We're very lucky at Slack to have that. Companies like Calendly and Notion and Airtable have that, where using this using the tool with multiple people is better maybe than using it with one person. And that's also something that's very, very good and indicative of a place that you want to exercise product-led growth. The second area is that you are just in the discovery phase of product market fit. If you're right now looking for product market fit, then product-led growth is fantastic, because with product-led growth, you naturally are putting a lot of monitors into your system. You're getting a lot of feedback, data back of what's working, what's not working, and you can change that product very, very quickly. So if it's not ready for sales repeatability, if you don't have that product market fit, if you're not ready to go and pitch to a customer and repeat that over and over, then product-led growth is probably a better approach. And then finally, sales efficiency. It's just simply very expensive to build a sales team. And so in the first couple of years of development of a product, obviously product-led growth makes a lot more sense. So these are three areas where I think it just makes more sense to be heavy product-led growth. So let's talk about the reverse. So when is it good to shift, or why in the first place actually would you shift from sales-led growth? Well, first, here again is the ChatGPT definition of sales-led growth. I think that this is very true. I think that one of the things that this misses is the product angle. So we'll talk a little bit about this. Sales-led growth is not only a sales-driven activity. Product management and the entire product development lifecycle has to change when you do sales-led growth. But we'll talk about that in a second. First, why shift to sales-led growth? The first thing is that you're just after a larger total addressable market. So everything from companies that are bigger expect different a different way to buy. They're not going to sign $1 million contract over the phone or online. They just expect the type of post-sales customer support or even pre-sales account manager that works with them for their unique needs. Same thing with industries. If you're going to sell into healthcare or financial services, these are industries that usually require sales-led growth. And then regions, Germany, France, Japan are all fantastic kind of next steps to expand into, but all regions where culturally they really expect a little bit more high touch. The other area is that you have found that your product just becomes complicated for the deployment. So in this deployment, you need more services to make sure that the product is successful. If you need more services after the sell, you're probably going to want account management or some type of salesperson before to do an SOW to get the customer ready and to manage that customer relationship. Next, perhaps your viral coefficient, if you're following that, or your K factor. This is how many people, a typical user, how many other users are they bringing onto the platform through invitations and after that person went through the funnel. If that drops below 1, and by the way, 1 is really hard to get to anyway, but if that drops below 1, naturally what it means is that your product is not spreading on its own. You have to do sales and marketing in order to have it grow. Now, that doesn't have to be sales-led growth. It could be website, it could be SEO, it could be all kinds of things. But if you're tracking this and it's starting to drop, this is when you have to start thinking, is this something that we are mature enough now to start really thinking about that? And then the other way to look at it also is lifetime value, meaning the total amount of money that you're expecting to make from a user and how much it takes to acquire that user, the CAC. If that drops below 3, then it tells me at least that your lifetime value might not be high enough. There could be other reasons, but if that lifetime value is not high enough, perhaps you need a salesperson to go in and explore use cases within that account to go and grow the usage of your tool inside that account. And finally, you sell enterprise SaaS. I think that every enterprise SaaS company, if you look at the markets, even Atlassian, which is well known for product-led growth, eventually went and built out an enterprise sales team, and in their latest financials show that the enterprise side is growing faster than the self-service side. And this is just natural for larger organizations, really more to the point above of the total addressable market. There's a certain point where product-led growth just ceases to expand and doesn't serve the needs of those larger organizations. All right, so why? Now, the other question is when. So we figured out why, and we figured out that, okay, there's a time and a place when we're going to do it. When is that right time? So the first thing is product maturity. This is the reverse of what we talked about with the product market fit. Once you've reached product market fit, then it's probably a good time to start with a sales-led growth or start transitioning to sales-led growth in your strategy. This one of the reasons why you want to wait for this also is that as you shift, and we'll talk about this in a second when we talk about what happens when you shift to sales-led growth, as you shift to sales-led growth, there's going to be drag on feature development due to your investments in enterprise features. So for example, if you develop encryption key management, the ability to encrypt all of your data with a key that the customer brings, one of the security features that many times is required here, that's going to mean now that every other feature that you build is going to have to integrate into that EKM functionality. See, I promised you 3-letter acronyms. So we need to make sure that this is done in the right timing. It's very important. I always joke that I joined Slack at the right time, because if I would have joined in the beginning, it would have been doomed. So the next is customer demand. It could be that you're pulled. When I joined Slack, there were customers like IBM, American Express, Apple, very large companies that really were pulling Slack in. Some of them had employees that had signed petitions to get Slack in, but the company policy was such that they could not. And so there was a lot of demand. They were calling up Slack and saying, please, create this. I know that that's a fortunate position, but even if it's not that, there certainly could be, if you've done well with product-led growth, you probably have teams inside your large organization that have gotten exceptions, they can use it, but now you could probably expand those teams into departments or into entire companies if you do a sales-led growth tactic there. The next is some type of competitive pressure. You might have a competitor that comes in and really is pushing you or they're going sales-led growth, and they're coming into your accounts where you have product-led growth slowly growing, but they're coming up to the CIO and calling that CIO and saying, you need to basically take our tool and get rid of all competitive tools. And I've seen that happen over and over. At that point, if the market is starting to change in that direction, it might be a time for you to do the same. The next is IPO readiness. The public markets with enterprise SaaS specifically favor this sales-led growth because it's more stable. We saw this with the Zoom price of the stock there, where as soon as the pandemic waned, a lot of the SMBs that they initially attracted started canceling their subscriptions, where the large enterprises are a little bit more stable. So as you head towards IPO readiness, this is going to be important. Next, capital availability. It takes a lot of money to turn this into this transformation. So probably C round, D round, E round, somewhere in that area, maybe as early as B round. It really depends, of course, on the company and what your financial outlook is. And then this is totally Ilan's guide, rule of thumb. So don't necessarily take this to the bank, but 1 to 2 years before ARR growth, it goes below 40%. This is an attempt to continue to hit that rule of 40. And rule of 40, ARR is only one part of it. ARR growth is only one part of it. But as if you're tracking your ARR growth, and as it goes down into those 40s, it's going to be harder and harder to continue to accelerate that with PLG. If it's going in a downwards direction, SLG might be able to come and accelerate that again, going after new markets, new types of customers. Okay, last slide, and then we'll go into the Q&A in a few minutes. But this is a biggie. This is the one where we talk about how to do it. So you've decided that it's important, you understand exactly when, and now the question is, all right, how do we move forward with sales-led growth? So the first thing is it has to start with company alignment. This is not only, as I said earlier, this is not only a sales-led initiative, it is also not only a product-led initiative, and you're going to need resources, you're going to need budget. The company is going to have to be aligned that this is important. From the CEO down, this has to be extremely important to do. The next thing is that you're of course going to need investments in go-to-market. So you need to, from that alignment needs to come the idea of bringing in a CRO or a head of sales or something like that, and really starting to build both the pre-sales and the post-sales organizations. If I'm going to build data residency in Germany, that's very important to German customers. If I don't have a sales team that speaks German, that's not going to work very well. So there has to be that alignment in the go-to-market investment as well as the product investment kind of coming in, hand in hand. And then probably most importantly on this company alignment are resources. At Slack, the enterprise team that I led was about 1/4 of the total product development team. And that's really important. And I recommend this type of separation of duties and really creating what we call pillar. So we had 4 product pillars, and one of them was enterprise. It's very important to have that separation because you're going to have a lot of conflict in what feature do we build. This customer here wants this security feature, but we really know that we need to build this other feature in order for end users to be delighted by the product. Which one do we build? Which one do we prioritize? If every single time you have a feature, you have to find a team to do it, it's very, very difficult. So having an enterprise, pillar that's focused on that, that company, that IT buyer, the chooser versus the user is super important so that you can really maintain focus on those priorities. Okay, let's talk about the meat here of the enterprise product itself. The first thing is that when you go to SLG, and I should say one thing that I've repeated myself several times here, but I may be unclear. When I say go to SLG, I don't ever propose, maybe ever is a strong word. Most companies are not going to shift 100% from PLG to SLG. There is a spectrum and you're going to fall somewhere in between. At Slack, our goal was about 50-50. We ended up getting about 70 or so percent at one point. I don't know anything about current numbers, but it's 70% SLG to 30% PLG. But that there's probably never going to be a position where you throw out all of the PLG and you stop developing product for end users and for adoption and all that. If it was once successful, it's probably something that you want to continue to invest in at least a little bit. So anyway, that is the focus goes from the specific user that's using it to that chooser. And that's something that's really important. For example, both at Slack and at Airtable, when I came in, one of the things that I did was really analyze the pricing and packaging. And the reason why that's important is You want the packaging and the pricing when you start going to SLG to really reflect the growth of of the customer, not the end user necessarily, but the customer. So if it's a tool that's starting to be used by a single individual, and then by a team, and then by a department, and then by the whole company, you want to create pricing structure that incentivizes that growth, basically, and provides value along the way. Pardon me. The next thing is, the features. I always look at SLG as features, as TAM investments. So I'm going to spend some type of resources on, a feature. What is that going to return as far as the investments? And so the way I look at it is that there's kind of three areas of investments there for sales-led growth. There is security and compliance, things like SSO and data loss prevention and audit logs and so forth. Administration and deployment functionality. So how do I onboard? How do I create adoption within my organization? Change management, all the things that, as you use a tool in a large organization, it becomes more complicated, you need to invest in. And then finally, scale and performance. So larger organizations, reliability is important. The thing can't go down, but also performance is very important. In things like information overload. So you have many more users, you probably have a lot more information. What does that look like? So you're going to invest in things that go beyond security and compliance. A lot of times people think, when they think about enterprise, they think just security and compliance. That's really just the beginning when you go into these large organizations, what they expect from the product. And then, and I apologize, I see that there are chats and Q&A, but I'll turn over to that at the end in just a couple minutes, and then we can go backwards if we want to in any of this. And then finally, the product development lifecycle. So this also was the same, the experience that I had both at Slack and Airtable. Enterprise customers expect a roadmap, about a 12-month roadmap of what's coming up ahead. They want to buy a service, they want to buy a vision, they want to make sure that where you're going with this is congruent with what they're expecting. That means if you're going to do a roadmap, you're probably going to need to do quarterly planning. So if you're doing ship when ready, you probably need to move more towards more careful plan and deploys. It doesn't mean waterfall, by the way. We don't need to be scared. It can still be iterative, lean, all that good stuff. But it needs to be a little bit more tops down, really, as far as the planning and the execution of the roadmap. Okay, last area here. The most important thing in sales-led growth is that you have a product that has a repeatable go-to-market motion. What that means is that you can hire a salesperson, give them a territory, a direction, content, training, all that, and that once they're ramped up, there's a certain amount of ARR or revenue that they'll be able to close, $1 to $2 million or so, depending on on what you're selling and what area you're in. But that's kind of typical for enterprise SaaS. When you can get to that point, that's it. You've won the game, basically. Now, that's not only a sales thing, though. That is also a product a responsibility. And so specifically on the product side, the things that we can do on the repeatable go-to-market motion is competitive awareness. Stuart Butterfield used to say, competitive aware, customer obsessed. I totally agree with that. When I say competitive awareness, I don't mean we go and we build whatever our competitors have and we just copy that and have parity or anything like that. But it's important to start at least being aware, because those differentiations, the things that make your product unique, are going to help for your sales team when they're out in front of customers. So it's important to be aware of that and maybe highlight some of them even through some functionality, through some investments there. The second thing is, really just get on the road as a PM, start building customer trust. You're starting to talk to those choosers again, choosers, not the users. What do they want? What is a good outcome for them? What are the business objectives that they're trying to satisfy with your software? It's really important to know that. You're probably developing a CAB, a customer advisory board at this point, which is something that we can talk about perhaps later, but something that I've got a lot of experience doing, so we can go into that a little bit more. And then lastly, really map to the company metrics. So the product metrics that you're developing, how do you map those to the company metrics? What I mean by that is, let's say you have company metrics of like land new logos, maybe in a certain industry, certain geography, or just maybe just land new logos. Okay, so what product metrics can I drive in order to land new logos? Because I can't, of course, just land new logos as a product owner, as a product manager, but I certainly could do things like, onboarding flows, for example, or certain, workflows within the system for specific industries, if that's what we're, focus, or certain personas, highlighting, certain things within the product, like ROI. So the end user gets ROI within 15 minutes and is able to share that with their, with their boss. So features like this that I can think about that help, in the landing of the new logos. With that, I will wrap the presentation. Thank you, everyone, very much. I'm looking forward to the Q&A session. Denise, I'm assuming that I turn it back to you to lead that part.
Yeah, it's you and me now.
All right. I'm going to stop sharing if that's okay then.
That sounds great. That way they can see your face better.
All right.
No, so we've got questions queued up in the chat. And as you were talking, I loved how you pointed out that really you're talking about complementing the strategy in this case, where you're adding to an existing strategy. And so there are a couple of questions from the audience here who they want to understand, like, can you have both? And I think you said absolutely yes. But then there's sort of a follow-up as you think about segmenting your customers. Are you using both strategies across customer segments? Or as you think about customer segmentation, are you applying one strategy more so than another?
I like to combine. Now, at Slack, we had an expansion team, growth team, they're called in other areas, where they're focused really on from like website or SEO marketing activity to what we called at Slack a successful team. So a team that comes in and has 5 people that use the application. And within that, it was very hard for them to develop features that specifically targeted a financial services person who comes through the website. And, because it's all kind of generic. It's basically like, how do you invite your colleagues and all of that. But so I don't know that they could necessarily target large enterprise through PLG, but that PLG motion helped a lot because those were seeds that then we could take, for the sales-led growth and start nurturing those seeds and then, cultivating them and growing them over time and so forth. So I definitely think they complement each other very, very well. Having a pipeline of warm leads of users is so much better. And one of the tactics that we use both at Airtable and at Slack is actually taking those early teams that have found success and are your champions and bringing them to the meeting when we meet with, senior buyers, so that we're not saying, this is how great this tool is. It's actually your employees that are doing that. Right.
No, I think that makes a ton of sense. There's another sort of related question, and you and I chatted about this a little bit. But is there a case for starting or leading with sales-led growth and then transitioning to product-led growth later?
Yes, I didn't actually mention this, but I actually meant to. Absolutely. I advise a lot of companies and enterprise in the enterprise space and advise them basically to get their first couple sales-led growth type, beta customers immediately, as soon as possible. And the reason why, while I mentioned in product-led growth, as you're doing product market fit, you get a lot of data. That is true, but it's a little bit more difficult to actually have the back and forth of what's working, what's not, and all that. And so having a handful of companies that are friendlies that you've attracted and you can work with them while you're doing product market fit is actually a fantastic strategy to get there. So you might not want to build a whole sales army yet to get that, but as a CEO or as a couple other employees, maybe even if you have 1 or 2 account reps, having that start to go, especially if you know that that's eventually where you're going, is not a bad thing at all. In fact, we might be talking. I haven't seen all the questions. We might have a question about the cab, but people ask me about cabs. And I say, like, as soon as you can. The answer to when should I start a cab is as soon as possible. And I can talk a little bit more about that if we want to talk about cabs.
Yeah, let's get there in a minute. But maybe back to this point of, like you said, if I know that's where I'm going. And there's another question here from the audience saying, how do you know, even pre-product market fit? Like, should I start with sales-led growth versus product-led growth? Because I might, knowing upfront, am I going to pursue both paths? Am I going to pursue one path? To your point, helps you figure some of those things out. But how should I decide which path to choose?
Yeah, I think a lot of it really is, if you go back to the PLG slide that I shared, as far as like, when is PLG good? If you have a product that fits those three, dimensions that I mentioned, if it targets those, those end users, then I think it's a then you probably want PLG in there. Eventually, if you're enterprise SaaS, you will also, have SLG. And so I don't think it's an either or. I think it's almost a when in my mind. Especially, again, enterprise SaaS. I don't know, the cookie business or any other, type of retail business, but I know enterprise software. So if that's where you're at, I think you're going to eventually have both.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, and I think you addressed some of this, and it's exciting that so many people really are looking for this guidance on, how do I make this choice? And hearing you say, hey, for most of you, you're going to find yourself in both of these camps. Because one person in the audience is saying, hey, there's an aversion. Feels like maybe there's an aversion to SLG lately. And I think that this is a trend, right? The cool kids are kind of doing PLG first.
Yeah.
And so you talked about the when, but like, how do you actually go about champion it? Like, what does that look like? Or what has your experience been in saying, I think now is the time?
Yeah. So I think that what I've seen both at Slack and Airtable is there was really a natural point where PLG was working well in both, in both companies. It wasn't like it was dying out or anything like that. It was good. So you could just say, well, let's do more of that, right? But there was a natural point where we just simply saw that we were just leaving basically opportunities on the table. There were literally, and I know the whole thing about focus and all that. And, I think that's why I said about capital, like you want to get to the point where you can invest in that in SLG. But we literally had customers that said, we will do more with you if you are ready to be enterprise ready. And enterprise ready is not just develop a bunch of, security software or security features. It's just not going to work that way. They just expect very different, everything from the way that the account rep works with them and the contracting and the hand-holding through the MSA to, product, not just security, but, again, I said roadmaps and all that. They just expect a very different set of, relationship than you do with a PLG.
Yeah, so maybe this is a good time to switch gears to the customer obsessed and the customer obsession and the customer journey. And so so you mentioned before the cab, I guess it'd be great to kind of dig in there. You said, hey, my advice is start it as quickly as possible, but
Yes.
now how do I choose? Like, who should come? What should we talk about?
Yeah. Well, first, why? I think before you even answer that, you have to answer the question, why do I need a CAB, a customer advisory board? The simple answer that I have for that is a couple things. One is, there is certainly some learning that you're going to do from these, really strategic accounts. We'll talk about the who in a second, but these strategic accounts and the feedback that you have from them. So that's a good thing, is the learning. But the other thing is that I think that, a lot of times what happens when you go to SLG is you have, these customers, and everyone is a unicorn or a snowflake. They all, have their own, little, requirements. And then basically they come in and you come and meet with them and they're like, here are the 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 or 100 things that I want, and if you keep on playing that game, you're never going to win. You can't go and build all that. So by putting these top companies together, you're able to basically have them work with each other to figure out what is the most important, really, what is the most important list? One of the things that I recommend to do with cabs is really put them together, talk about all the features in the beginning, when you're just getting to know each other, have them all put their features together in one list, the 20 from here and the 15 from here and all that, and group them together, and then have them do like a dollar voting exercise. And those customers that have, 20 requirements, when they see in the room that the other 20 large companies that they respect, these are big brands, are asking for only these things here, but not this other thing, all of a sudden it's like, oh, you know what? Yeah, you're right. Like these 3 things are really the most important thing, not the 100 things. And so building that relationship and that trust, and then of course you have to deliver on that. You can't just have that and then not to do anything. But it helps you prioritize, deliver for the most important things, and then build that relationship with those cab customers. I'd like to say that I've never lost a customer that's on a cab.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, they get to feel heard. They get to feel like they're influencing the roadmap.
Yeah.
And as a product person, I'm sure you feel the way I feel, which is that is probably hands down one of my favorite, days of the year is whenever we meet with our customer advisory board.
Yeah, I used to have to actually disinvite people from the room because people got in the company, they would invite themselves to this thing. And I was like, look, we can't have 50 people with 20 customers. The other thing is like how many customers. I used to say that 15 to 20, and that was back when we had boardrooms and these were physical meetings, because usually boardrooms, can't fit too many more than that. Now that it's Zoom, you could go larger, but I recommend not to, unless you specifically break it out into breakout sessions. Because what happens is if you have 20 people, there aren't that many people that are comfortable in talking in that large of a forum. And so you'll have 2 or 3 people that will speak, and then everyone else, basically will be quiet, and you're just not getting the same, the same feedback. The other thing is who to invite. What's really important is to invite the highest level person that still has awareness of your product. So you want someone who has really awareness of what the company needs globally, rather than like minutia of features, really diving into the details, really what is going to be successful for the company, but also aware of your product and what the limitations are, or what, you should be doing moving forward. That's going to net you the best feedback. So not necessarily like invite the CIOs. That's probably not going to be great feedback.
Right.
That's what you do, is you sell to the CIO. There are companies that do that. So
absolutely. And so finding that sweet spot is important. So you walk away from that cab, by the way, with this huge laundry list, maybe not so huge because you've gotten them to reconcile it, but a laundry list of all the things they want. So how do you then think about your roadmap and how that shifts, right? Because there can be this temptation, because they are your biggest revenue producing, customers, to say, I'm just going to focus on them and to over-index there. And so you think about, the execution side and the planning and the road mapping with your team. How do you strike that balance?
Yeah, I always say, in enterprise software, build software with customers, not for customers. So I have had an experience. I won't name the company, where the CEO really signed contracts with very detailed promises, and it was a very, very painful process down the road, because your entire roadmap was booked basically with these promises. And then also you ended up getting to the point where you couldn't deliver everything, and so you had unhappy customers. So I very, very rarely will agree to sign off on a commitment of a feature in a contract, very like this many times in 6 years, I think, at Slack, basically. And so it's really important to not do that. At the same time, when you build software, it's really important to work with your customers. So you're not just building it when it's not the enterprise side. When it's Stuart Butterfield, he's got it. He doesn't have to go and interview people to figure out like what the next cool feature is, great feature is of Slack. But on the enterprise side, you really got to be working with those customers to know. There are very specific customers, I don't know if I can name them, that we worked with enterprise key or encryption key management, where it was like, is this going to meet your needs? Does this meet your security needs? Is this fast enough as far as the encryption and the decryption and all that? If we went out and just did it and came back, we would probably have to rebuild it. So it doesn't make sense to do it that way.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, one person in the audience called it customware. And so it's been great that you've stayed away from that.
Oh, yeah.
But maybe the follow-up question is, and you described it, right? There are these enterprise features that only your enterprise customer is going to care about. But how do you make sure that you're not starving the SMBs who may need something different, for example?
Yeah. Well, so again, at Slack, we do the same thing at Airtable. We have these different pillars, like in both companies, we call them product pillars. And so we have the whole product design engineering organization split into these 4 pillars. And in both cases, we have a separation of duties between enterprise and then the end users, what we call at Slack, we called core, but here we call something different. Their focus is much less enterprise. Now, enterprise every once in a while has to collaborate, has dependencies, has to ask for things, but for the most part, they're really focused on users. They're using more user research. They're using a lot more, gut from the designers and the PMs and the founders that have that, that kind of intuition on what needs to be built. They're using a lot more of that than they are basically like, what is a TAM opener, enterprise unlock? What is the thing that's literally, I mentioned TAM, literally when we did the initial planning in year 1 or year 2, like 2017, we literally went and took the largest features that we were asked for, and we did a TAM analysis. It was like a Harvard Business Review type of thing. Like, what is exactly the TAM as far as the industries, the type of users, knowledge workers? Like, if we do this, what is going to be the result basically of that? And it was a multi-step like analysis, and then we sorted by that, and we really went down the list basically based on that. Essentially, there was a little bit of also existing customers that were like, very, very loud. And so it was a combination of a little bit of both of those, but it was absolutely like, what is going to be the largest unlock?
Nice. No, I think that's great advice. When you think about maybe the mix across your portfolio, because you're saying, hey, I'm investing in enterprise and that's discrete and separate, maybe from the growth teams or teams focused on other, do you have guidelines or principles in terms of percentage mix, or has that really varied significantly from company to company?
At Slack, we had basically 4 pillars that were almost equally split. We had enterprise platform, which was APIs, third parties, all of that. We had core, which was all the features that threads and everything that you use basically in Slack. And then we had expansion or growth, which really, thought of more of, okay, what is a sign-up flow and what does that look like? And how do we get these successful teams, build at Slack? And we have something a little bit similar at Airtable, slightly heavier towards core, because we are more focused, I think, on the SLG. I think if you have that spectrum, Airtable, I think you take the dial and you move it a little bit more even to SLG than Slack was. But that was the split. So it's up to you, obviously, as a company, what is right for you. Are you going all the way hardcore on SLG? If that's the case, maybe that enterprise team should be, 35% of the company, and then the other teams are split, 65% split 3 ways or something like that. But I do think it's really, I call this out, but I think it's very important to have that pillar split and know kind of what your budget is from a company. So the company says, we want to invest 35% in enterprise or SLG. We want to invest 25% here. Like I said, there's different models as far as how you're doing it, but that's after you figure out that model, lock it in. You can obviously grow headcount, all that, but it's so important to have that predictability. I think it was one of the reasons for our success on the enterprise side in Slack, was that we just knew exactly what our headcount was, so we knew how to make trade-offs in what is most important.
Right, and then you're not necessarily trading off between these customer segments, you're really trading off with
exactly. And then every year we did headcount, and we would come in and I would make a business case of, hey, if we invested more in enterprise, if enterprise was 30% instead of 25% of the company, look at how much more I could unlock and how faster we could go and all that. And every year I was rejected, but that's a different story. I think it was definitely the right call. We were a small and mighty team, but at any rate. That's how
I
it
love
goes. Yeah.
that. The trials and tribulations. Maybe switching gears a little bit, there's a question around pricing strategy.
Oh
So
yeah.
what metrics or experimentation are you thinking about or reviewing when you're thinking about pricing strategy for both the PLG side and the SLG side?
Yeah. I mean, I think that for the PLG side, you know, when I joined Slack and it was PLG, it was basically like the three prices that you see today, and then enterprise just said coming soon. There was an enterprise SKU, but it wasn't even a price yet, basically, of how much it was going to be. And the reason why is because it didn't really matter. Like we didn't have features there. We didn't have, you know, anything to really attract a customer to go buy an enterprise SKU, but it was, you know, important to kind of paint the vision that we're, you know, that we're going to do this one day. But the first three SKUs were really, the first three, one of them being free, were really thinking about how does a small team, you know, get value, again, go to successful team as soon as possible, basically. And how do we get them? So it's very, very affordable to come in and get, you know, the first paid version, basically, essentially. As we became, you know, more mature, we changed that pricing and had basically packages that leaned more towards enterprise. And the same thing happened at Airtable. And so what's important, what I look at, first of all, as far as experimentation, I did a lot of this at SAP. We had a full, you know, pricing and packaging department that basically worked with you and did all kinds of Monte Carlo simulations on pricing and all that. I'm not a huge fan of that. And the reason why is that on the enterprise side, as you shift towards SLG, what those enterprise customers expect is predictability. What they want is they want to know that they can set up aside a budget. They usually have a budget for whatever it is that you're selling, and they want to know that that's the budget that you're going to use and not much more than that. And so something that is similar to the other players in the field is probably what you want to do. You don't want to create something totally. So if you're competing against a bunch of companies that do, you know, user-based pricing, so every user has a license, coming in with a platform approach where you say, well, no, you're going to just do a platform approach, is very risky. Now, there are times where it's been, you know, very successful, but it's a very risky strategy. Unless you know that there's a good reason why you want to change the pricing to that model, it's something that's going to create friction, because they're going to say, wait a second, you know, your other three vendors that we're considering have it this way, but you're telling me I'm going to pay this fee here, and then every month I'm going to get billed, you know, based on my usage. I don't even know how much I'm going to spend, but these guys here, I know exactly how I'm going to spend. So again, I'm not saying copy the competition, but look at it certainly as inspiration. I think that's why if you look in the enterprise SaaS, if you look at the pricing pages for right now for Figma, Slack, you know, Miro, Notion, they're all going to look pretty similar. And it's not that we even compete with each other, but it's this enterprise SaaS software where the buyer, the procurement officer really knows how to treat us as enterprise SaaS. And so it's not scary, it's familiar.
Yep. No, I think that makes a ton of sense. We didn't really talk much beyond the cab, which we kind of alluded to the fact that like somebody's got to run this and it's you and your team, but about the product team. So as you think about making this shift, you know, how do you think about your team and maybe skills and roles on your team and sort of how expectations might change?
Yes, for sure. It is, it definitely is something that you need to hire for. When I hire for enterprise product managers, one of the things that's most important for me is, you know, can they have this, you know, kind of relationship? Can they build you know, can they have a conversation? Can they build a relationship with a CIO? That's one of the things that I look for, because it's really important to be able to get that trust. At some point, either you're going to be running a cab session or you're going to be off on a business trip somewhere, meeting and helping the sales team, you know, and it's really important to have that. You know, I think we all as PMs use data, but the type of data that you use when you're on the enterprise side is different than the type of data that you use on the growth side. For example, on the growth side, you're going to look a lot more at numbers, conversion rates, pipeline, A/B testing, all that type of stuff. On the sales-led growth, side, you're going to look at the pipeline and product gap misses and loss reports and things like that. And so the type of data that you look at is very different. That doesn't mean that you don't want a data-minded PM, but it means that you want someone that is more kind of like MBA, and I don't mean go hire an MBA student or an MBA or someone with an MBA necessarily here, but that kind of thinking, that kind of strategic business-minded thinking is the type of data that you're using and then sorry, the other thing is potentially just experience in the different security and compliance requirements that you have. So someone who's done SSO is probably a good person to bring if you're about to build SSO and SCIM integration and all those types of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And we probably have time for maybe one more question. And again, I think there's sort of allusion to it with even in the data, right? You talked about win-loss data, right? Like I'm looking at loss reports, seeing what's happening. I mean, part of that is just even good hygiene in the sales team to capture those things, or your CSM team to capture those things. But how do you help to build that alignment between sales and the product team and really like foster that collaboration and communication? What are maybe some of the tips and tricks?
Yeah, so many, and it's so important. First, I'd like to set up some type of process. An Airtable application is really good, by the way, to be able to capture the product gaps. We did this also at Slack, so that the team in the front of there's a lot of, by the way, for PMs that work in SLG, we have to develop a lot of empathy for those folks on the front line. My dad was a salesperson. He used to has a badge or a plaque on the desk that said salesmanship begins when the customer says no. There's a lot of no's thrown at you, and it's a really hard job. And so the product gap process, to be able to capture those gaps, and then the feedback back to the sales team. Okay, we hear you. This is what we agree to do, or this is going to be on the roadmap, or no, it's not going to happen ever, or something like that. Whatever, it's good to have that communication. And then regular meetings with those leaders. I meet regularly with the leaders of the sales and support organization and marketing organization, but all of them, really to understand what it is that they're seeing from their people, so that I can really bring that into our product and design organization. So those touch points are super important. Here at Airtable, another thing that we do is we call it a product rodeo, but it's basically a meeting where we have all of sales, or all of sales and post sales, and all of product together in almost like an all hands every couple months, and that's where we talk a lot about the roadmap and what we're thinking and all of that, and then have also at that point, salespeople and post sales really bring back information also from what they're seeing. That type of communication is so important.
Yeah, you said it too. It's like the sales side. I always say two best friends of a product person really get to know your SEs and your salespeople, and then those implementation teams that are dealing with the post sales side. So you support customer success. You nailed it.
Yeah.
Well, needless to say, thank you so much. I'll just say, one question, more of a statement though from the audience. Thank you, Ilan, for answering so many questions. So I think you shared a wealth of knowledge today. People really appreciate it. We'd have you back anytime.
All right, good.
But I just want to say thanks from all of us. And this was a really great session today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for being here. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.